to my composition 1, which is going to be performed by the ensemble this evening, which is very lovely for me, actually, because the research was begun, I think, about 2 years ago in Maribor. Was that 2 years? We were working together on the Maribor Conservatory of Music and Dance. Unbeknownst to me, apparently, there's a Neanderthal flute just down the road, which I had no idea about. So, yeah, fortunate happenstance, serendipity, rather than meaningfulness. So today I'm only going to be discussing the theory behind it. I'll leave the composition up to the ensemble tonight, because really it's their piece. And in this lecture, I really just want to convince you that it is possible to recreate Stone Age music, and you'll be able to hear it tonight. So here goes. So the foundational text for this project is The Dawn of Everything by David Graeber and David Wengrow, which uses recent anthropological and archaeological evidence to rethink the study of prehistory. The importance of doing so can be seen in a cautionary tale outlined by the critic Bruno David, who recounts the story of how the art of the cave of Altamira in Spain was found in 1879. He depicts this as a legendary encounter that forced us to rethink what we thought we knew about the human mind. Nothing quite like Altamira's cave paintings had been seen before, and neither the general public nor the nascent science of archaeology, only newly informed by the kinds of evolutionary thought propounded by Darwin, were yet prepared to recognize that artistic masterworks could have been made by Paleolithic peoples. Indeed, so difficult it was for the discipline to believe that a prehistoric society could have produced works like this of such incredible sophistication, that the cave's discoverer was ridiculed for having been taken in for what they regarded to be so obviously a hoax. And yet, the artworks of caves such as this, like Altamira and Chauvet in Spain, which I'll come to later, show that Paleolithic cultures not only equal, but in many ways surpass the imaginative capabilities of us moderns. And it's this truth that The Dawn of Everything attempts to set out, albeit primarily in regard to politics and social organization. Just brace for a horrible noise for a second. And that's it. So in this, Graeber and Wengrow critique accepted notions of what they portray as, on the one hand, a Rousseauian fall from grace and innocence, and on the other, the Hobbesian notion of life as nasty, brutish, and short. The authors maintain that both perspectives are mistaken. Each is limited by the givenness of our own contemporary imaginations, in contrast to the boundless potential of our ancestors, which the text shows them to have demonstrated in various expressions across thousands of millennia. The book's fundamental thesis is this: that from the very beginning, or at least as far back as we can trace such things, human beings were self-consciously experimenting with different social possibilities. Concerning societal organization, there is no single pattern. The only consistent phenomenon is the very fact of alteration. Now, the background to this argument is obviously one of pressing intervention in our own political reality. And it can be seen, or it can be read, as a post-financial crash response to Frederick Jameson's oft-quoted phrase that it's easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism. The book, therefore, represents an attempt to break the imaginative deadlock into which revolutionary enterprises become subsumed back into the system that resists all intervention. And in this way, Graeber's involvement in the Occupy movement is no coincidence. Thus, the authors ask how we came to be trapped in such tight conceptual shackles that we can no longer even imagine the possibility of reinventing ourselves. Contrary to the Altamira skeptics, our ancestors knew things of which we cannot even conceive. Most importantly, for Graeber and Wengrow, a truly satirical perspective on structural relations. So they argue that this institutional flexibility, which we see from archaeological evidence, for instance, the shifting back and forth between alternative social arrangements, building monuments and closing them down again, allowing the rise of authoritarian structures during certain times of the year and then dismantling them, enables the capacity to step outside the boundaries of any given structure and reflect, to both make and unmake the political worlds that we live in. The imperative here is not that we should believe in these capabilities, but instead learn from them. So while this dictum concerns social organization, there's no reason why it would not apply to other aspects of Paleolithic knowledge, particularly within the domain of the aesthetic. So we have surviving evidence of social structures, even of paintings, but not the ephemeral art of music. In beginning to recapture this, how might we proceed? I suggest we may begin to construct a methodology through a reading of this, Stephen Mithen's The Singing Neanderthals, which is just a great title for a book, right? It makes the case that human language developed from a musical forebear used by our evolutionary ancestors and cousins, the Neanderthals. More important to the present line of argument today is the methodological principles that this text employs. For the ancillary thesis of this work concerns the use of and affirmation of affect and an aesthetic or even religious feeling of the presence and therefore reality of these long forgotten individuals. And I'd argue that in doing so, Mithen makes the case for an epistemology of the vanished, showing what lies beyond empirical knowledge to be crucial to archaeoacoustic study. So Mithen frames his critique of the discipline thus. While archaeologists have put significant effort into examining the intellectual capacities of our ancestors, their emotional lives have remained as neglected as their music. Now, the methodological consequences of this can be seen in a later passage where the author posits the use of music therapy in Neanderthal culture. Now, he has no evidence for this. It is nothing more than an unsubstantiated flight of fancy. Or is it? Mithen follows this statement with an assertion that in Ice Age conditions, making decisions was a matter of life and death, and Neanderthal life was full of decision. He then refers to the work of Robert H. Frank and of K. Oatley and P. N. Johnson Laird, which has shown emotion to be a critical component of rationality. Now, although Mithen uses this to make the case for Neanderthal culture as a tapestry of affect, he implies that just like Neanderthal hunters, archaeologists need emotion too, in order to correctly interpret the data, in order to make the correct decision. And sometimes this means venturing beyond the available evidence into the realm of the unknown via the aesthetic. So Mithen advocates contemporary artworks as windows through which to recapture the lost world of a different species of hominid, most strikingly that of ballet as a wormhole to Neanderthal art. This approach blossoms into this daring wager in the work's final pages, a manifesto for the methodology of the musician rather than the archaeologist. Mithen contends, like John Blacking before him, that the immediacy of the past is with us always, in an encounter both with the biological inheritance of our own bodies and the aesthetic transactions in which they participate. Now, this is partly correct, but it is wrong to claim that the body offers some kind of originary Rosetta Stone with which to communicate with past artists. Whether rhythm emerges from bipedal evolution, as Mithen and Michael Spitzer argue, or from the heartbeat, as suggested by Zubro and Blake, it is the idea of a beginning itself which is problematic. As Badiou attests, there is no origin. It represents a limit, both temporal and imaginative, that is at odds with the enterprise of Mithen's methodology of creation and affect. Nor is the experience of the body ever our/its own. It is always, to use a Lacanian terminology, symbolically mediated, and as such manifests within experience as entirely different things in various historical and cultural contexts. However, Mithen is correct when he says that the aesthetic bears the tension between the subjective and the objective, and as such it deals always in the overcoming of thresholds, whether these be the symbolic order's arbitration, the impositions of the cynic, the origin, or empiricist prohibition. It is an impossible machine, a portal to the past through which, in his conclusion, Mithen incites us to travel, giving examples such as choral music, J.S. Bach, and Dave Brubeck. In all these suggestions, it is significant that historically informed performance does not feature once. That's it. Now, to answer why this might be, I'm going to consider two existing approaches to the excavation of prehistoric musics, one theoretical and one practical, bearing in mind ever Graeber and Wengrow's assertion that our early ancestors were not just our cognitive equals, but our intellectual peers too. They were neither ignorant savages nor wise sons and daughters of nature. They were, as Valero said of the Yanomami, just people like us, equally perceptive, equally confused. So the first theoretical critique concerns Zubro and Blake's The Origin of Music and Rhythm, as this article serves, in my view, to explicate three key issues within the existing discipline of archaeoacoustics. Firstly, the concept of origin, which we touched on briefly already. So Zubro and Blake state that at some point in the Upper Paleolithic, there was a transition from non-music to music that was accompanied by shifts in intent, instrumentality, religion, cognition, education, perception, and causality. They argue that the emergence of music from non-being to being clarifies certain aspects of study, writing that definitional and processual questions should be clearer for earlier periods because at the beginning of a phenomenon, they are simpler and fewer forces in operation. The difference between non-existence and existence stands out stronger. I would argue that this fundamentally misunderstands the nature of such a process, which is neither digital nor singular. Graeber and Wengrow are absolutely clear on this. Oh, I don't have that slide, but they are, reminding us that such accounts function in the same way as creation stories, and while there's nothing wrong with myths, such insights can only ever be partial, because there was no Garden of Eden and no single Eve ever existed. In discussing an origin of music, Gary Tomlinson, too, asserts that modern musicking in a real sense did not develop at all, but instead fell out as belated emergences. Reductive mapping can be highly useful in the study of art. Yeah? The blunt generality of pre-periodization, for instance, can assist in historicization. Focalizers, whether they be texts, ideologies, or approaches to reading, can draw new meanings and insights. But this is always to work with surviving artworks, which contain the myriad contradictions and infinities of human expression that may resist the constraints of such focalizers and readings. In the absence of actual primary sources, such an approach is deeply problematic. For Zubro and Blake map contemporary ideas of process across this fictionary-originary divide between intentionality and non-intentionality, between the arbitrary and the causal. So the authors thus provide a schema of pre- and post-music that contrasts, for instance, pre-music non-constructive perception and non-causal modeling with post-music construction and causal modeling. Okay? Now, there's no reason why this might be so, other than the imposition of modern bias. Just to go back to Mithun earlier, his model of the origin of language, for instance, offers an entirely different possibility, which would be that linguistic evolution constituted a move away from pre-Homo sapien holistic mimetic language, the singing Neanderthal, towards the arbitrary use of discrete units. Music then could have transitioned from meaningful, imitative, causal sound into non-relational signification. Together, these concepts of the origin and of the mapping it permits lead to the author's advocacy of historically informed performance. They prescribe here that in attempting to study the origin of music and rhythm using simulation and experimentation, or to recreate prehistoric music, real-world demonstration should be created that demonstrate empirically what is expected to have occurred. Now, this is the center of a constellation which contains the previous two issues and accounts, I think, for the principal limitations to this field. Historically informed performance does not return you to the aesthetic event, it bars you from it. Mark Berry argues that elective authenticist positivism, that's it, works by reducing focus to a few facts in themselves, so to emphasize their one-sided objectivism. In doing so, there is always a hierarchy, a separation, an occlusion wherein many facts are excluded, especially those that might lead one beyond in itselfness. In this way, the confines of our own imaginations, as identified by Graeber and Wengrow, are not overcome, but rather embedded with a type of itself historically contingent instrumental reason. It is not just the origin and its maps then, but their illusory excavation, which must be rejected. So this can be seen in practical attempts to recreate Paleolithic music using such methods. And now we move on to the practical critique. Pottingowski and Wieland's The Edge of Time, for example, works with reconstructions of ancient instruments to depict the music of the Paleolithic. Now, this is fascinating and significant music, both in itself and as an attempt at unearthing the past. But it embodies the consequences of the disciplinary errors outlined in the theoretical inquiry we have just undertaken. That is, it exists within the limits of historically informed performance by imposing imaginary boundaries upon the aesthetic infinities of prehistoric art. For instance, the music is characterized throughout by 21st century idioms, with familiar notions of gesture, development, and yes, tonality, as well as the use of similarly familiar textures such as regular ostinati and arpeggios. It is not far from the traditional Western canon. Indeed, there's a shock halfway through the album when the musicians offer their performance of John Cage, which, as Mythin suggested, sounds a lot closer to the potential of the Paleolithic than those affected by historically informed performance practice, which sit alongside it. Now, this surely would not have been the case. Hunter-gatherer music today, which, like the methodology deployed by Potęgowski, conjures the material conditions and technology available for people 40,000 years ago, this shows an inventiveness that entirely outstrips that of the Edge of Time. Ian Morley, in this article, would seem to support Potęgowski's procedure, writing that legitimate parallels to past auditory behaviors can be based on a pattern of shared constraints with contemporary hunter-gatherers. But comparing the Edge of Time with the examples that Morley gives shows the mistake in the approach. It is unwise to extrapolate from a material constraint in order to construct a creative limit. Among others, Morley gives the examples of the African pygmies of the equatorial forest and the Eskimo of southwest Alaska and Canada. The former offer a tradition of dazzling choral polyphony with complex polyrhythms and striking melodies that not only imitate the natural world, but interrogate it. Whereas the latter's tradition of throat singing, which many of you are probably aware of, uses vocal multiphonics to produce thrilling, otherwise inconceivable sounds through the form of a competitive musical game. Living practices such as these lay bare the flaws of a method whose empiricist focus is upon constraint rather than innovation. Furthermore, Potęgowski explains how we let ideas flow into the music regarding the reasons and occasions our ancestors would have had for playing music, such as the instrumental imitation of natural sounds, keeping memories alive, or musical accompaniment to ritual. But Morley notes that in these instances of hunter-gatherer art, both communities see themselves as being part of the land, sound as a physical act within it that can change the world as opposed to only imitating it, accompanying it, or being influenced by it. Without an imaginative leap beyond mere empirical possibility, a void is created in the artwork. What else would fill it, if not the musician's historically and socially determined biases? However, it is only by comparing this to the surviving artworks of Paleolithic peoples that we can truly appreciate the shortcomings of such an approach. The evidence of the Paleolithic art of the Chauvet Cave, shown here, provides us with the ultimate case against an archaeoacoustics of historically informed practice. By constructing limits, whether these be material, empirical, or creative, rather than infinities, the musicians have created the general, whereas the cave is exceptional. It is simple to offer a general music, whereas impossible to locate the specificity of genius and insight, unless, that is, we invert our understanding of these parameters and see, as Badiou urges us to, truth as that which is infinite and generic. Take, for instance, the cave's remarkable artwork, the panel of the rhinoceroses. This contains an altogether surprising use of movement and line, which you can see up in there in that top right-hand corner, which Werner Herzog has described as a type of proto-cinema. Its lifelike motion reaches across the static, voluminous horses of art. I don't have them on pictures, but you've seen them, I'm sure, everywhere on Greek pottery, the Bayeux tapestry, and those old pictures of those sausage-like horses jumping across the fields. Reaches across all of those to this, Giacomo dynamism of a dog, only through the advent of the camera. Now, in the absence of the panel of the rhinoceroses, an attempt to reconstruct its wonders via the theoretical and practical procedures that we have just looked at would not allow us to propose this magnificent artwork. The exceptional exists beyond the general. It is not through the recreation of material and cultural limits that one excavates the ingenuity of the forgotten artist, but through the futurist painter who showed the same truth of movement in paint. This must be how a speculative archaeoacoustics proceeds, away from the limit and instead in search of the limitless imaginations of the artists and composers of the past, as remarkable as this artist who dreamed the dancing, quivering animal almost over 30,000 years before Bala did his own. How would such an enterprise proceed? Through the understanding that such an exception, although it takes place beyond the general, is nevertheless generic. And so we must turn to Alain Badiou, who argues for a meta-history of invariant truths in which both the Chauvet cave and its modernist counterparts partake. Now, the crucially non-causal nature of such a relation offers the possibility of moving back in time from artworks we possess, such as Bala, to those we have lost, such as the cave, such as artworks like the cave. At the opening of Logics of Worlds, Badiou claims that the given ideology of our own time is that there are only bodies and languages. To this he counters his own materialist dialectic, the assertion that there are only bodies and languages, except that there are truths. Regarding the existence of these, he holds that it is merely a question of describing, through the mediation of some examples, the sufficient effective truths to the extent that, once they have appeared, they compose an atemporal meta-history. As William Watkin explains, the invariance of exceptions over time and space, spanning disciplines and their conditions, are such that you can prove that truths exist simply by giving examples of them. So Badiou presents primary sources in the domains of the four known truth processes of love, science, politics, and art. In this, Badiou draws a comparison between two panels from the Chauvet cave. This, the panel of the horses, and the panel of large engravings. On one hand, on the other, Picasso's two horses dragging a slaughtered horse, and man holding two horses. This is to show the emergence of a truth in both sets. Now, fundamental to this argument is the absolute difference of the subject matter. The horse of the hunter-gatherer is inaccessible to the modernist painter, and vice versa. The objectivity of the animal signifies very little with respect to the complete modification of the context, a gap of almost 30,000 years. So just as Mithun was mistaken in conflating our physical bodies with those of our ancestors, so it is incorrect to assume that these horses have anything in common with one another at all. Rather, it is the artwork's invariant theme and eternal truth which unites them. Badiou contends that this regards the fact of the animal as a type or name is a clear-cut and a formless continuity of sensorial experience. The emergence of this invariance occurs within artistic practice itself, in the technical consequences, the effect of which is the primacy of the line. Through this, the images affirm the truth that, in painting, the animal is the occasion to signal, through the certainty of the separating line alone, that between the idea and existence, between the type and the case I can create and therefore think, the point that remains indiscernible. So despite the entire divergence of the horses captured by these painters, their representation unites in the same animal, the idea of a horse with a capital H. So this leads Badiou to propose several features of truths, of which three concern this argument. Sorry, that's the wrong slide. Here are the truths. Yeah. So firstly, produced in a measurable or counted empirical time, a truth is nevertheless eternal, to the extent that, grasped from any other point of time or any other particular world, the fact that it constitutes an exception remains fully intelligible. Though generally inscribed in a particular language, or relying on this language for the isolation of the objects that it uses or reproduces, a truth is translinguistic, insofar as the general form of thought that gives access to it is separable from every specifiable language. And finally, a truth is both infinite and generic. It is a radical exception, as well as an elevation of anonymous existence to the idea. Thus, one should not see Picasso as a consequence of the Chauvet cave. Indeed, the cave had not yet been discovered when he created his figures, but instead we should understand both as participants within a truth regarding the nature of representation and the idea. Because a truth is both a radical exception and an elevation of anonymous existence to an idea, it is a generic exception. And so, even in the absence of Chauvet, it would be possible to reconstruct its truth through the truth in Picasso alone. We may thus combine principles from Mithin's methodology with Badou's meta-historical topography to propose an alternative to the disciplinary weaknesses we observed earlier. It is not from the general we should proceed, from bodies and languages, but from their exception, truths. So, having grasped such a truth, how would one use it to reanimate the lost work of Paleolithic composers? Remember, it is our task to think excess and innovation, their generic exception. Yeah, exceptions depend upon specifics. Earlier, I demonstrated how the vacuums in historically informed practice became filled with the composer's contemporary bias, with unknown knowns unconsciously replicated. And so, in traveling to the past, it is vital to regain the satirical perspective identified by Graeber and Wengrow, a truth that we too have access to through a popular tradition that reaches from Star Trek to Jonathan Swift to Aristophanes and beyond. Such a function of satire allows us to use the overcoming of our own prejudices as the detail that they would bar, leveraging limit against limit. In doing so, the tension between the accessible invariant truth and its appearing via the unknowable potential of an entirely other world becomes itself a creative tool. So satire opens up speculative archaeoacoustics to two final contextualizations. First is the theory fiction of the CCRU, Nick Land and Reza Negrestani, where philosophy and fiction radically commingle, each becoming part of the other to vindicate its excesses. Fiction may take on difficult, extensive philosophical digression. Philosophy may take on the formal structures of fiction and the delights of unjustified imagination within its methodological tools. Similarly, second contextualization is the tradition of anthropological science fiction, such as Ursula K. Le Guin's Always Coming Home, which takes the form of archaeology of the future, or Orson Scott Card's Speaker for the Dead, which treats anthropological science in the same manner that the genre engages with mathematics, physics, cosmology, and tech. These texts and their traditions deal with creating new perspectives on what it means to be human outside of the dominant symbolic order, the first step on any imaginative route to the Paleolithic. So, having outlined the theoretical basis for speculative archaeoacoustics, I will conclude just with a brief sketch of how it might operate in practice, the result of which is tonight's Composition 1. First, you have to locate an invariant truth. So, for this piece, in my recent work on the truth of paradox, I've argued that Badou's positioning of Berg and Webern as the local antinomy or paradox which embodies the truth of the Schoenberg event represents a fundamental misreading. Rather, as shown by Richard Kurth, the music of Schoenberg constitutes a Hegelian Aufhebung. Any German speakers will correct me on that? Is that okay, Marco? Fantastic. Yes.
Can you repeat the last part of Schoenberg?
Aufhebung.
No, before you were... The full sentence. The whole sentence.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, yeah. So Badou's, basically Badou positions Berg and Webern as a paradox that he says shows, or sorry, an antinomy that constitutes the truth of Schoenberg. And I think that's a fundamental misreading. Rather, Schoenberg is I think, when a lot of people talk about Schoenberg, they see a Hegelian Aufhebung as a form of synthesis, in that he was moving forward historically from something more, that he was, in a way, kind of overcoming tonality into something new. I think, following this guy, Richard Kurth, that tonality is still there, that there's another way of looking at this word, which is that it's not synthesis, but suspension, where the historical sediment is still very much present, and that's what creates the tension. And so if we understand Schoenberg as this, as a form of paradox, where tonality is not negated, but rather remains as a latent possibility through the tension between the subjective negation of the composer and the weight of history, which was obviously profound at that moment in time, you can see that those compositions, particularly those early, well, the early free atonality ones, represents an invariant truth of paradox, where something can almost be two things at once. The two mutually exclusive things can coexist and indeed actually contain one another. For me, Schoenberg and particularly Berg offer the ultimate modernist realization of this, what I've termed elsewhere a contingent dialectic. The two mutually exclusive things coexist rather than synthesizing together. They're held almost like a quantum superposition. Having located that truth, or any other truth you may care to do so, we then need to reassemble it through the satire of archaeoacoustics science theory fiction. Yeah, that's quite a phrase, isn't it? Maybe need to come up with a better thing for that. Astif. Yeah, through the satire of Astif, to proceed without limit to the imagination, without the false consciousness of origin and the fallacies that it implies, using narrative detail as a satirical, dialectical aikido move that leverages our own biases against them. We must remember, too, that 21st century equipment and procedures are paradoxically essential for us to reclaim the lost past by situating us and our archaeological quarry as contemporaries. Through this, we may share in the modernity of our ancestors while overcoming the ideological partisanship of our own, reconstructing through an invariant truth in which all may participate, a forgotten masterwork of the Upper Paleolithic, Composition 1, to be performed tonight. Thank you very much. Yeah, there's another slide with a different thing on it. Had the reception been different, booze and tomatoes. Yeah, I suppose it's probably a beautiful day, and you're all eager to climb a mountain or swim in a lake rather than speak to me about dead guys, but and women and other people. But does anybody have any questions, James?
Yes. Hi. That was phenomenal. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
One thing I wonder is, like, when engaging with this process as a performer, how does one's not just mindset or perspective, but also performance practice and particularly like the experience, like how visions of changing one's experience within the practice, like fall into this methodology, this framework. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
The current lived experience of our contemporary life, of our contemporary clothes and bed and social structuring. I feel that it's so easy for us to be able to try to project our own modern identity to the past, or just ways of building into the experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really great question, and I think this probably comes down. I think this comes down to the question of a truth and its appearing, and that a lot of the things you were speaking about there are questions of appearing, which are the things that change, whereas the truth does not. But our experience of the truth is perhaps the same. And I think the way of thinking about that is through the idea of going to a medieval reenactment, right? If you go to a medieval reenactment and you dress up as, Oliver Cromwell, Henry VIII, and sit and eat a big chicken, you are never going to be further away from those guys than you would be at that moment, while you're wearing their clothes. While you're in perhaps even in the exact same situation or the exact same terms of appearing of their, let's say, historical truth, right? You would be almost much closer to it to be in somewhere like Westminster, somewhere where there was a place of like bloody power struggle, which even in wearing some form of, let's take clothing that communicated a type of power. Because though the instances change, a lot of those forces are the same, and crucially, they're both absolutely modern, and that's something that it's the problem with historically informed performance is a fantastic thing. There are so many of the best gigs I've ever been to have been historically informed performance, because in the same way that going to medieval reenactment can be fantastic, it can be a brilliant thing to do, but it's not doing the thing that it says on the tin. It's doing something quite different, you know. So yeah, I think it's less, again, personally for me, it's less about getting into the mindset of what it might been like for a Paleolithic composer and musician, as rather to find a way of recreating a situation that would have happened, an exceptional situation. And the fact is, like, we are, though we can't, as I said before, our bodies are not a bridge to them, but our being as symbolic animals is. You know, that's one thing we've always, human beings have always been. We've lived in a symbolic world. We've lived in a dream world outside of the world that we physically inhabit. And so thinking of, like, finding that, even if the instance of the appearance are different, is, I think, again, it's not perfect, you know, but it's going to get us closer than, you know, dressing up as Henry VIII and eating a chicken leg, you know. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, yeah. I'm curious to hear more, and this may be like our whole conversation at least, about like the process of like searching for and engaging with that truth,
Mm-hmm.
like for performers, for composers, for etc.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's the process of going towards it is itself a truth. Like it's universal, but timeless, I guess. But it's yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. It's not in here actually, but it's interesting to say because it's a similar thing of that. That's what unites all the, you know, all of the great philosophers who ever talked about truth talk about it as a process. You know, whether it's Marx as the subject of history, whether it's Kant, you know, the transcendental subject, whether it's, you know, Badiou also, even though you don't reach it, the movement towards truth is a process that impels you forward into something good. Yeah. Yes. Sorry, Dan. Hi.
Yeah, I'm quite curious as to what you mean by music in this context, because you touched a lot in your talk about our kind of projections of the modern era or certain societies where we kind of look outside of those.
Mm-hmm.
And you highlighted a few different kind of modern ethnographic practices in music. So you talked about the Inuit folk singing, which is this competition thing. It's quite closely tied to certain cultural practices that we would maybe consider non-musical. Or I think Henry Stogart spent time in the Andes with the Tassi tribe, where he really struggled to communicate notions of music with them because the instruments that they created were so tied to agricultural practice that it wasn't seen as a performance in that sense.
Yeah.
And so my question is how you approach that in taking something that presumably we're going to see downstairs on a concert hall in this kind of contemporary setting.
Yeah, definitely.
And so essentially, did music exist?
Yeah.
We may have instruments that we can see, but what is the kind of idea of music that you're taking from Paleolithic and bringing to today?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. Well, I think in terms of music, I think the problem of definition is it's an impossible question. What was it? Gary Tomlinson says, music, humanly organized sound. You can't go past that, you know. But it's the problem with definition, isn't it? There was saw somebody talk about this the other day, trying to define a chair, and then it could be a zebra, you know, because it's the problem with definition is if it gets any way close to being what it is, then it is no longer itself. I think what you're talking about here is, particularly, I suppose, what I'm doing is specifically about a form of symbolic, humanly organized sound. And now that is not, that's not to say that that's what all music can be, but I think it's certain that it emerged at some point within those thousands of millennia. You know, I think it's impossible that people were painting, you know, pictures like like this, and to not have an interior symbolic world that could also be applied to sound. So the work tonight, and actually it's in the kind of proposal for it, where you see, I didn't talk about it today, but you can see within the program is written out the kind of proposal, the science theory fiction aspect of it that says who the composer is, what they're trying to do. And in this case, it is it's a movement from a practice of the group to a practice of the individual. So from one of kind of what you might call a hymn to one of a relic. Would be a way of thinking about the domain of music being drawn from being a group practice, perhaps like, you know, I mean, I'm trying to think of an example. I'm thinking of one of my friends whose mum is actually lives in a tribe, and they have a group practice of where they dance in a circle with shells around their ankles. And this is obviously a group practice, perhaps more like going to the club. I mean, again, I'm perhaps more along the lines of singing a hymn, going to the club, which is very different, again, to what we're going to do downstairs tonight. And actually, not to go off on a tangent here, but I think there was a beautiful example of that last night at the opening concert, right? Where there was Opus 1, which is a very contemplative piece. It invites, you know, even from the way that you're sat out, invites a kind of theatre of the mind towards music in the midsummer Slovenian folk music, which almost invited you to dance. You know, you really got the feeling like there was that movement between the two, and that they are very, very separate practices. And in this, it is about, I suppose, the truth or the elements of appearing that I'm constructing through satire, through fiction, is the movement of the opposite way, of a point when people think this is not. It doesn't have to be just a hymn. It could also be a relic. You know, we could do something with this internal world. And again, that's not, when I say this, that is a truth of music, it is not the absolute truth of music. It's a truth in the sense of Badou's sense of multiple processive truths. It is one of many truths of music that I think in this instance allows us to recapture. But I think that's a very interesting question of how there are other aspects of humanly organized sound that you would do in that sense. Does that answer the question?
It does. I have a follow-up.
Oh, brilliant! Please, yes. Sorry. Yeah, of course.
Which kind of maybe leads on to that, because you also talk about kind of satire and the importance of satire, and something that I felt kind of came out of the lecture is there's still this separation between the human and the animal.
Mm-hmm.
And there's lots of things I think we could find in the animal world that don't make sense to us, maybe don't make sense on a functional level, that we wouldn't generally consider animals to create art, but we might not be able to find a rational explanation for why they use those practices, and whether that's something you considered looking back at Neolithic practices, and then whether that's something that can then reflect back to our own present time, seeing ourselves as sort of immanent with the animal sphere rather than outside of it.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, I see there being such a distinct line between the human animal and anything else that we've encountered. I like, that's not to be, that's not to say that so many other species are, you know, glorious, incredible things that at times actually, you know, do create something that is almost like art. Like they discovered these octopus cities, right? Which have fantastic names like Octopolis, and I can't remember. I mean, the octopus didn't name them. There's not a sign that says it's like we've called them Octopolis, but they have things that are, you know, I don't want to say approximations, but are forms of excess. You know, to do anything more than that would be to anthropomorphize it, but such as like town squares where they shout at each other and perform, you know, and things that are not necessary to, you know, just survival. Animals are not mere autonoma. They are, you know, thinking, rational, sentient beings like us. However, I do think there is a difference in the human experience. Was it Simone de Beauvoir said, you know, nothing that the human animal does is natural. There's nothing natural. No. To say that death is natural is the most awful thing, because death is for a human is entirely unnatural. And I kind of I kind of take that there is, though there is, yes, there is a line between, you know, we are ultimately at the end of the day animals. There is such a degree of line in our unnaturalness, and that has to do with that dream world that we kind of exist in, that is more real than this one. Again, that's just my own understanding, and you know. So in terms of, so I suppose in terms of, but on the other hand, there I am constructing a limit, constructing an empirical things like any cynic or things. And the point about limits is that they should be overcome. And I suppose that a procedure like this should be equally applied to, you know, the art of not octopi, octopodes, or is it octopodes? Octopeople, yes. To the cities of Octopolis and to the songs of Wales, which, you know, I'm sure are marvelous and magnificent. And actually, yeah, I should listen more to my own idea and say, you know, to hell with the limit. Let's make some octopus art. I did one thing I wanted to I talked about ages ago was a mole opera, because moles hear in a completely different way, right? You know, and they see things. You imagine all the little moles in their like little tuxes coming along. Yeah, mole opera. Yeah. Anyway, sorry. Yeah, Max.
I didn't have exactly clear how do you say that the historically informed practice renders the past invisible?
Yeah. So that's just kind of what I was, just that the historically informed performance doesn't allow you to access the past. It bars you from it, because it's a repetition, which no new thing ever is. It's just basically as simple as that. So if, like, for instance, we all came back in here tomorrow and tried to do this lecture again, it would be as different an experience, really, as is possible. It would be more, but I think we all know it would probably be a more similar experience to this one if we all went and, you know, jumped in the lake, because it would be something new that we were doing together, as this is something new that we're doing together. If we did the same thing again, it would make it completely different. You know, because it would be a repetition. And when you apply that to things like, when you apply on top of that all the, you know, all of the other kind of ideological baggage that comes with reimaginations of history, it becomes even more different. You know, the basic idea is that if you want to get, the closest way to get to something old is to do something new, because the old thing was new once. It wasn't something old, and that's always, you know, that's always the challenge about art, and it's why, you know, you can see it also looking at this. It looks like it was painted yesterday, you know, and you feel this, and when you see it like that, when you begin to see the, you know, that horn actually moving, you're quite close to the person who painted it, and that's not such a strange thing, because we go to art galleries all the time, and, you know, the difference between me and Joshua Reynolds couldn't be, you know, we live in completely different worlds, and yet when you like look into his brushstroke, you can almost feel the electricity of that moment. You and him are very, very close together, much more than you would be if you know, if you did some kind of a, I don't know. I'm running out of steam here because I don't know what Joshua Reynolds used to look like, or what he dressed in, or even what period he was. But I think he was before, you know. But if I dressed up like him and wandered around, you know, a recreation of his world, if that makes sense.
Alastair, does that not assume that our ancestors didn't try to do the same for
Yeah.
their back?
Yeah, I mean.
And therefore show a possibility of that just being another of the truths?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, absolutely, historically informed practice as not like as a negation of itself. Yeah, I mean, well, I think, I mean, I would, again, this is kind of beyond my field of expertise, but that's never stopped me before as a, you know, as a 36-year-old man, you know, like. So let me try and I think in one sense the concept of history and even prehistory is kind of a modern invention, you know, and even our interest. There's actually a book just been published on it, The Invention of Prehistory, that it itself is wrapped up entirely with with what we are, and you can see it. Like prehistory has functioned as everything from a justifications for genocide to like celebrations of certain civilizations over others. It is very much a kind of contemporary invention, as is a lot of that comes to do with the end of kind of biblical view of the world. And I think you're right that people will always have been fascinated by the past and have tried to access it, and of course, but I would just say that with the caveat of what prehistory is, and I think the whole point of this method is trying to do away with that. And for me, it comes down to a particularly, a very emotional experience that I think a lot of people who talk about this stuff had. It was when we were in Maribor, and just I have no idea when it happened. It was just like this real sense of a great, indescribable grief for all of the people who have existed, and because we think that you think about history going back in your head, it's like you go back to the Middle Ages, you go back to the Islamic Golden Age, you go back to Homer, you go back or you go back to just little fragments we have of people, and then it just kind of stops. But it went on for thousands, so much more time than that, and it's just gone, just not there at all, just in kind of these tiny traces. And even this is quite modern compared to what went before that. And then you go back into even previous versions of types of humans that existed, who would have been very similar to us. And it's the same as I feel like as looking into the future or looking into space. And in that sense, it feels like it has the same potential. And so I wonder, I wonder if people have always felt like that. And so perhaps yes. I think it's a wonderful idea. Anti-historically performant. Well, that's a real, atsif is nothing. It's what we can call it. Maybe that'll be the next proposal. Yeah. Does that answer your question, Nisha? Yeah. I love it when you do that. You answer a different question. Does that answer your question? The person has to say yes. It's like, what if somebody say no? Absolutely not. Answer the question. Answer the damn question. Yeah. Sorry. Does anybody else have a question that I'm not going to answer directly? Okay, wonderful. You're not asking a question, are you, James? You're just nodding.
No, we'll talk later.
Oh, okay. So I thought because you're always so positive, I thought you were nodding encouragingly, but maybe asking a question.
No.
You have a question? Go for it. Yeah.
No question.
No question. All right. Okay. Well.
We'll talk later and eat food and I'll make merry.
Making merry sounds absolutely fantastic, which is also probably an invariant truth of the human, and which we can all participate in with, a little party later on and access our lost ancestors. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Ingrid Mačus, please.
Hello, thank you to everybody to being here. I will share some points of view and some starting points of my compositional process for the piece that will be performed tomorrow, RMA for viola and electronics. I, as a composer, I approached composition in the first place non-directly. I was starting with piano when I was a kid, and then I studied piano and musicology, and I had so much respect for this silence which is given to composers to feel, to be filled with sound, that I was always having so many doubts to how to start and how to realize a compositional process. And somehow I always managed to do it in some non-direct ways. I was improvising, and then when I started to teach, I always provide my students with some methods and materials to make them able to improvise themselves. And then somehow I was starting to collaborate with some poets and with some video makers and with some radio drama makers and directors. And somehow I saw that the communication between different materials and between different people and different approaches is very important. And I saw that I have so many problems also to communicate with musicians, because a lot of my ideas were somehow buried under some surfaces. So this year I tried to somehow approach all my difficulties through this question: what is the impact of the intertextuality in the compositional process? When I was starting the process of this piece, I was starting from the poem by Paul Celan. But soon after I read the poem, I was so amused and amazed by the power of the words, and because I was discovering this, his poems for a lot of time, I was trying to transform this power of his poems in the sound, but I was not able, and always I was combining some words with sounds, and I saw that as soon as you put a word in some sonic environment, it can ruin everything. And I was trying to make myself able to transform a word and to make further research in the some archetypical elements of the different phonemes. And I was then somehow pushed to experiment with these pictures that you will see in this presentation. I was actually experimenting with a drop of blue color and water, and then I was making photos of it, and somehow discovering what imaginary landscape can a poem produce in me, and how can this be transcribed in music, because I didn't want to put simply a word in this sound material, but I was so very pushed to use the performance voice. So this were a little bit, a lot of conflicts in my starting process, and I was very, very happy and lucky to work with another composer in another project at the same time, and we were making a short chamber opera together. And for me, this was the first time that I was working with someone on the same musical project in the same space. We were literally sharing the room while we were composing. So for me, it was very strange to communicate why I was searching for ideas, and I saw that when you have these imaginary landscapes and you are somehow constructing some imaginary sound and imaginary sound spectrum, let's say, this spectrum is, it contains different elements. And while I was communicating with her, I saw that my elements were brought by poetry and words and some images and some inner feelings, and her were totally different. And then when I was trying to make a system for us to communicate, I said to her that we should maybe share some thoughts of how sound is constructed, and if we think about sound as a spectrum, we can also think about this imaginary spectrum, which is a combination of different allegories, different our feelings, and different points of view on different matters. So I was analyzing myself during this compositional process of this viola piece, and I saw that I started with some semic writing, and as I said, with the droplet of the color, and then some misreading happened, and I will explain it later to you. And then I was trying to make some network of relationships between the sounds and the phonetics and the imaginary landscape of this poem. And also I was trying myself to play the viola. I was playing cello, but the viola for me was something new, and some very, let's say, wrong techniques came out, and I discovered that it was very difficult for a musician, professional musician, to replicate this my wrong technical approaches, but it was very funny to see what came out. Soon I discovered that all these theories that come from intertextuality in literature can be used in my own process, and that it can maybe be helpful for me to have more strong structure to be communicated also to a musician, and also for me to feel safer, because I think that this process of discovering the beginning is very important, and it makes you very fragile. I mean, also for me it's like this. I feel very unstable, and I feel that everything is how to say, to be discovered, and I'm really excited by this, but at some point there is a point where I just feel lost, and I was trying to help myself when this point come in my work. So I see that under the surface I have all these relationships and poems and everything, but in the end, we are working with sounds, and the sound is the only thing that is on the surface. And in these sounds, we can see that there are some structural elements, and then some elements that deviates from these structural elements, as it is explained also in the intertextual theories in literature. And I was then analyzing this text that I used because I really liked this poem, and in general, I really like poetry. And when I was reading the first time this poem, I found it in some Italian translation. And the translation was a little bit wrong, let's say, or for me, a misreading of the original. And when I was reading it, there was mentioning only the, not the stigmata in the wind in the second verse, but there was just a wound in the wind. And for me, this was a very big difference. And when I discovered that there was this wrong interpretation, I was so surprised, and I was asking myself how many wrong interpretations in different poetries, but also in different communications come out. And that's why I was using this blue drop of color, because I was imagining this this wound in the sky, like a literature thing, but also a fact, like a droplet of some misreadings and some wrong, wrong interpretations. And then, while I was discovering all these my approaches, I somehow found again a composer which was for me interesting since I discovered him, is Fausto Romitelli. You probably know him. I was born in near to Gorica, where he was born, and for me it was very interesting that I never heard about him till like 2016 or 17. And I was so surprised that such an amazing composer was actually from my town, and I never heard about him, because he was living in France, and in Italy he's not so popular. And of course, because in Italy it's not popular, maybe also in Slovenia, and nobody is really taking care about his legacy. And when I was listening to his work, Index of Metals, I was so surprised that there was a sample in the beginning. And this sample, I couldn't recognize this sample because I don't know why, but I will now let you hear it, and maybe you will discover which sample it is. Sorry, no. Could you recognize it? As for me, it was a surprise. It's actually the beginning of this. Yes, this fact inspired me so much because I saw that you can make a new language and a new sound using actually a simple sample, and that yes, my starting point was very clear and for this viola piece, but now the problem was that I should build the sound, you know, and from the transition from the color drop to the sound, it's difficult, and as a fundamental principle remains valid. Musical language is not only the vehicle for expressing something, but it is the same as the content. It is the vehicle and the purpose at the same time, the word and the thing, signifier and signified. It is not possible to express something new with abused words. A conventional language will only carry conventional messages. To truly communicate through music, we must constantly renew its language and vary its codes. An aesthetic message expressed through linguistic clichés has in music no value other than the mere of entertainment. And I really liked his essay, which starts with this. I believe that the talent of a composer consists today in his or her ability to integrate different, often heterogeneous materials into the writing without renouncing conceptual rigor and the definition of the style, capable of metabolizing different influences and generating new sound images. This leads me to, while I was composing, somehow try to analyze his works. And I actually was very lucky to have this contact with Stefano Bonetti, composer and technician, who helped him realize the patch and yes, all the engineering for this video opera, Index of Metals. And he was sending me Romitelli's faxes that they exchanged in the yes, it was 2003, and this is his last composition because he passed away in 2004. And this composition was made in just 50 days because he was very sick, and he was actually composing in the hospital and sending these faxes to Stefano Bonetti. And I was observing all these spectras and the stretches of the spectras and all the usage of the FM synthesis. And I was so curious about why he was using all these different relationships and ratios from Barry Truax. You see that this thing here is explaining the ratio in the FM synthesis, which is coming from harmonic to inharmonic spectrum, as Barry Truax defines it. And it is based on Ferri mathematical series, and yes, Romitelli used it. But when you hear it in the music, you will hear a really very loud drone, and then all these spectras on the top. And I saw that this relationship between the ratio and the relationship in sounds in the FM synthesis was actually used also in the elements that he combines. So he combines video, the text, and the music, and also the concept of the opera, which he was always convinced that he would never write an opera, and then right before that he changed his mind, and I saw that maybe this system also could help me, and I was trying then to see what was some structural elements that I was using in my composition, and how can I combine and make some relationships and categorize these relationships in my composition. And it was very helpful for me. I saw that that I can be very systematic if I want. And this also helped me to communicate with Domen, because I had this this score where he has the indication for the voice, and then the indication for the bow, and then the indication for the percussive elements, and it was a little bit difficult to for him to orientate in this score. But when we were talking to each other, and I made it clear that there was these elements, for me it was clear, and for him too. And then we somehow found ourselves, at least for me, was like this, in the same creative space, and in the same, like, say, imaginary spectrum of sound. And for me it was really nice then to talk to him. Yes, as I said before, here is a short melodic line, and then I was, as I said, exploring the phonemes of this poem, and I discovered that some phonemes have there are archetypes for some symbolic words I didn't know. For example, I use a lot of F and T and M, and I discovered, for example, that M is a symbol for water, and I didn't know, for example. And then in the ending of the piece, I was so unsure of which of which sound to use to make him sing, and I was unsure, and I was choosing between O and A and U, and then I was reading about what this sounds signifies to us, and I saw that an A is very open and an O is very intimate, and then I was asking other people if they really, they really perceive these two sounds like this, and I saw that yes, in majority. I don't know for you, and I saw that in this process, when I was discovering what is constituting my imaginary spectrum, that I was trying also to anticipate which will be the communication between the piece and the audience, which for me is important. And I discovered that that this intertextuality has also some other potential, which for me is also important. yes, you can build an intertextual network for the listeners, and also the listeners are building in themselves this intertextual network, because they have to somehow perceive and combine different elements in their heads. But these relationships can be also somehow built between composer and performer, but also between composers. And I saw in Romitelli somehow a guide for this, because I think that Romitelli was very concerned with composers as not defining their works and not defining it in the community as they made it in, let's say, in Darmstadt or in the yes, in the history. And he saw himself as a virus in the society, and he saw himself as being very alone, because he said that everybody has some private language, and everybody is somehow impacting the culture and the society alone, so as a virus. And he said that somehow if we abandon the idea that everybody owns an idea, and that we can actually share also the samples, and we can share the imaginary landscapes, we can yes, be more present in society, and we can communicate better. Yes, and I would like to have this week the opportunity to communicate better with you, and to share some feelings and thoughts, and maybe to become a better virus together. Yeah. Okay, thank you. If anybody has a question, you are welcome.
Maybe a very similar question to what I asked Alastair before. Maybe could you explain a little bit more on how do you actually engage with the audience when you say that for you communicating with the audience is really important? Like, is the audience before your compositional process, or how do you understand this communication?
No, it is not before. I was just I never asked myself before this piece and this let's say auto-analysis, auto-psychoanalysis, what is my relationship with the audience. Actually, I was always very concerned with the work, and very concerned with the compositional process, and never asked myself. I was thinking that when my work will be done properly, then the communication should be like easy. But when I was trying to use words and some meaning in the sound material, for me was becoming more important to see what is the meaning, and how these words impact the audience. But I'm still in the process. I really don't know what will come out of it. But yes, I think that I'm not closing myself, and I don't want people to think that if they don't understand my music, or if they don't feel anything, or they can't connect with my music, that this is their problem. You know, I would like to have a communication and see what is the problem in the composition, because I guess, yes, as I said, I have a really great respect for the silence, and if I have a space to communicate, I should maybe use it properly to fill this silence with something which can be understood. Yeah. How about you? What do you think about your communication with the audience?
Yeah, let me answer you tomorrow.
Okay. Okay.
I guess it's kind of a question. Can you go back to the Romatelli kind of very fiery quote about text?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I feel like it's good. I'm just curious about how you respond to, not this one, the one right before, yes. Or no, it was that one, my bad, sorry. Thanks. Responding to, you know, composers who have a very, basically, opposite approach to this. I think about someone like Harry Parch, who talks about text as a means of actually direct communication, as something that he in his music really valued, and that the abstraction actually, rather than doing this, alienated the audience, and alienated, and there's sort of maybe a class background and interest in that. But I'm just curious how, like, maybe how you respond to that other perspective as well.
Yeah.
Because in some ways, yeah, both, I understand things about both. Does that make sense?
Yes, me too.
Yeah.
Actually, I think that they are very similar in some way, because they are so different and so distant that they become very similar. But I guess it depends on your sensibility to text and to words and to meaning. And yes, I actually, when I was starting to my compositions, with my first composition, I didn't have any problem with text. Actually, I was layering different texts, and I thought that it was okay. I don't know how to say, but now in this at this point, I'm not judging Harry Parch or this, but I'm very interested in how to transform a word to be some material, and how the sound is very a direct way to communicate.
Yes. Thank you very much for your presentation. I have a question, because it seems to me, I find this very impressive, because I can somehow relate. So you're, reflecting upon your own practice and trying to find something. And,
Yeah.
and you seem to not be exactly sure how to find it, and then you need guidance and so on. But I struggle a little bit between this openness on the one side and on the other side. So if I just read the last statement, it says, without the meaning, it says, so wait, to truly communicate, you must, and if you don't do, there's no value. So
Yeah.
it's very absolute,
Yeah.
right? And that's very hard if you follow, if you try, and we talked about truth before, if so there's this truth and I just need to find it and then everything will be good. So what is ultimately then your goal? What would a good performance be like, or what would a good piece be like? What is the moment when you say, oh yeah, I can be satisfied? I'm sure that, how to answer this question, it's impossible to answer, but just, so is it to rigidly follow a set of rules, or what would constitute the moment where you say, oh yeah, I think I've achieved what I've been looking for?
Actually, thank you for this question. I'm really struggling with this rigidity, yes, and yes, trying to find, you know, and then destroy this truth. And actually, I'm interested in the process, you know, and I would like to be able to, yes, to not be lost in the process, as I really enjoy to be lost, but somehow to be lost better. So this is, yes, this is the main goal of this, trying to observe myself and trying to find some guidance from higher self.
To be lost better.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.